Dooley, and I'm an education officer at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. And because this is an international event, for those of you who have joined us, a lot of people are still joining us still. So for those of you who have joined us, could you please tell us where you are joining us from? So I'm joining you from Johannesburg in South Africa. Where are you joining us from? Could you please use the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom screen to just write to us the city and the country from which you are joining us? We have people joining us from Amsterdam in the Netherlands. Some people are joining us from Knysna in South Africa. We have people joining us from Israel, Australia. Quite a few people from Australia are joining us. People from all over the world. We have people joining us from the United States, Berlin, Germany. We have people obviously joining us from Mauritius. So welcome to everybody who's just joined us. Someone is from Cape Town. So for the people who've just logged in, I've just asked everyone to please just tell us where you are coming from, where you are joining us from. Please use the chat function to just write down the name of the city and the country from which you are joining us. And in the meantime, I would like to thank a few organizations that have been instrumental in making this event possible. These are just a few out of many, the few that I will mention. So thank you very much to the Beau Bassin Jewish Detainees Memorial and Information Center in Mauritius. Thank you to the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. Thank you to the Island Hebrew Congregation of Mauritius. Thank you to the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. Thank you very much. And also, I would like to know, what is your connection to this story? How did you find out about this story? Do you work in this field? Could you also please use the chat function to tell us, what is your connection to this story? How are you connected to this history?
Can someone?
Mira is saying, I was born in the camp.
I could tell you. Hello, this is Ellie Gotts from Toronto, Canada.
Welcome.
And, can you call me? Yes. I am in Toronto, Canada. And in 2012, I interviewed Henry Wellish, who was a Holocaust survivor, and he was in Mauritius. And I have his whole story on video, and my wife, Esme, transcribed it, and we have it in text. So if anyone is interested, ask me and I will send it to you.
Yes, Mr. Gotts, how do we get hold of you? Could you share with us your details, maybe your email address, if you don't mind, so that I think a lot of people might be interested?
Sure. Can I write it?
Yes, please, on the chat.
And hi, Ellie, it's Tali. I hope you remember me. It was wonderful to have you in South Africa so many years ago and hear your testimony from Kaunas. And we have you in our permanent exhibition. So it's wonderful to have you with us today.
I'm delighted. I'm delighted to be with you, Tali. And I still remember very well my visit to Johannesburg. And we are well, but we are locked up now with virus. But anyone who is interested could send me. I am Ellie Gotts. Ellie Gotts. My email is elliegotts@outlook.com. And I always watch the messages from your Holocaust Center, the Tali.
Toda rabah. Thank you. Thank you. Nice to have you.
Wow. What an incredible treat. What a wonderful surprise. Thank you. And then I would like to thank the following individuals. Again, just a few out of many who worked very, very hard to make this event possible. Thank you to Owen Griffiths, who heads the Beau Bassin Jewish Detainees Memorial and Information Center, as well as being the president of the Island Hebrew Congregation of Mauritius. Thank you to Tali Regev, who is a former detainee and currently serving on the Honorary Council of Mauritius in Israel. Thank you to Tali Nates, who is the executive director of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. Thank you to Rabbi Moshe Silberheft, who is spiritual leader of the African Jewish Congress. Thank you to Ronnie Mikel Arieli, who is a historian of the Mauritius detainees' story and has done extensive research on this history. Thank you to Vanessa Calo, who heads the education and guiding department at the Beau Bassin Jewish Detainees Memorial and Information Center in Mauritius. And lastly, thank you to Jill Lahausa from Friends of the Environment in Mauritius. And I say just a few individuals out of many who have worked tirelessly to make this event possible. So thank you very much.
I just want to say that I'm also one of the detainees.
Welcome, Oscar. Thank you. Thank you very much, Oscar. It's a pleasure to have you here and an honor. So for the people who've just joined us, people are still logging in. For those of you who've just logged in, can you please tell us where you are coming from? Which country are you joining us from?
I am from Israel, Rehovot, where the Weizmann Institute of Science is placed.
Ah, yes, thank you.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm from Mauritius, Kishore, Uganda.
Welcome, thank you. Also, could you use the chat to just write down where you are coming from? So the city and the country from which you are joining us. Just use the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom screen to write down.
We are from Mauritius. Let me.
Yes, please use the chat function to just write down to us where you are joining us from. Also, before I formally begin the event and hand over to our Master of Ceremony, I would just like to ask everyone to please keep your sound on mute throughout the event. It would be very much appreciated to give the speakers and the technology a chance to be heard properly by everyone. So please make sure that your sound is on mute throughout the event. And when we communicate with one another, please use the chat function to just write down your message or your question or anything you would like to communicate. Please use the chat function for that. Thank you. We have Mary Ann Griffiths, who's joining us from Mauritius. We have Lee, who's joining us from Cape Town. Yes, quite a few people are coming in thick and fast. We have someone joining us from Tel Aviv. Welcome. And we have Jenny from Santin. Welcome, Jenny.
Hello, I'm Ruth Sitten.
I'm at Kate to type to everyone, to type your message.
Thank you. May I just remind everyone to please keep your sound on mute during the event. We will begin in about 2 minutes' time. We still have people coming in. We're expecting quite a few people for the event. And in just the few minutes that we have, I thought it would be lovely to just share a very interesting quote that has been on my mind. I swore never to be silent whenever and wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. And this is, of course, a quote from Elie Wiesel in his 1986 Nobel Peace Prize. And before I formally hand over to our Master of Ceremony, I would just like to announce that this event is being recorded. So if you do not wish to have your face in the recording, please hide your video. If you would like to be seen, you are most welcome to continue with your video. And also, once again, could we please keep our sound on mute throughout the event? And at this time, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to our Master of Ceremony and the Executive Director of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, Tali Regev.
Thank you very much, Mdu. Thank you everyone for sharing and for coming and for introducing yourself. It is wonderful to see all of you with us today. My name is Tali Regev. I'm the founder and director of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, and I will be your program director today. I would like to warmly welcome all of you who are joining us from all around the world to this historical event, the Commemoration Ceremony to mark the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the Beau Bassin camp in Mauritius. Special welcome to all ex-detainees and their families joining us today. We have some Holocaust survivors joining us from around the world. A special welcome to the British High Commissioner in Mauritius, His Excellency Keith Allen, and to the Ambassador of the Federal Republic of Germany in Mauritius, His Excellency Michael de Roux. A very warm welcome to all dignitaries, rabbis, colleagues from the 3 Holocaust and Genocide centers in South Africa, and members of their Board of Trustees. To the Mauritian eyewitnesses who generously shared their memories with us. To Harry Hargraves, the son of the last British commander of the Beau Bassin Jewish detainees camp. To esteemed academics, colleagues from Holocaust museums around the world. To friends of all the partner organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's commemoration. Since last year, we planned for today's event, but our plan was that this event will take place at the Beau Bassin Memorial and Information Center today in Mauritius. But then COVID-19 happened. And with the pandemic, we decided to hold the event virtually and open it to all of you who are interested in this less known historical episode that happened during the Second World War and the Holocaust. I want to also thank all the partners who made today's ceremony possible. The Beau Bassin Jewish Detainees Memorial and Information Center, the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, Friends of the Environment in Mauritius, and of course the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, Southern Africa. To welcome us to the ceremony, I invite now Owen Griffiths, President of the Island Hebrew Congregation of Mauritius, and the one who spearheaded, together with many other great partners, supporters, and friends, the establishment of the Detainees Memorial and Information Center in 2014, and he will deliver the opening address.
Thank you very much, Tali. Greetings to all attendees from around the world, and especially ex-detainees and their families. As president of the Jewish community in Mauritius, and on their behalf, it is a great honor for me to welcome you all to this webinar commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the Jewish detainees in Mauritius. It's wonderful that so many people have been able to join us, and as I said, from all around the world. This was, of course, going to be an actual commemoration here on this date, as Tali mentioned. With the global COVID crisis, this had to be cancelled and will be held instead in August 2021, Bizrat Hashem. This is thus a smaller, more intimate Zoom ceremony. Many of the government, diplomatic, religious, and other guests who would have been invited to the real function will be invited to next year's ceremony. The commemoration today is about this globally little known story of the approximately 1,600 Jewish refugees who, having successfully escaped from Nazi Germany and arrived in British-mandated Palestine, were arrested by the British authorities there as illegal immigrants and deported to the then British colony of Mauritius, where they spent almost 5 years in Beau Bassin Prison. Their liberation 75 years ago was not by American or Russian soldiers like in Europe, but rather with the war in Europe over and knowledge coming out about the genocide of 6 million members of the European Jewish community at the hands of the Nazi Germans and their collaborators from France, Hungary, Lithuania, and elsewhere. Their imprisonment no longer had a raison d'etre. The British also changed their mind about their cruel promise to never let the detainees back into Palestine. And so on the 11th of August, 1945, 1,307 detainees boarded the Franconia to set sail the next day for their 2-week voyage to Haifa. The experience of the detainees in Mauritius, where 128 died, was not all negative. When the British allowed, periodically, some detainees to go out of the prison on day passes to teach art or even to be musicians in Mauritian weddings at the time, the experience enriched the lives of detainees and Mauritians alike. All the ex-detainees I have met, without exception, while all being very angry at the British for deporting them from Palestine, have very fond memories of Mauritius and the Mauritian people. Furthermore, over 70 children were born in the prison. One of them, my good friend Tali Regev, is today, as was mentioned, the Honorary Council of Mauritius in Israel. A special greetings to you, Tali, and we look forward to hearing from you very, very soon. With regards to the general issue of the arrest and deportation of Jewish detainees to Mauritius, I'm very pleased to be able to report to you today that thanks to the initiative of the British High Commissioner to Mauritius, His Excellency Keith Allen, we received a letter, here it is, a letter from Lord Tariq Ahmed of Wimbledon, the Minister of State of South Asia and the Commonwealth in the United Kingdom government. And I would like now to quote some parts of his letter. To the Chairman of the Beau Bassin Jewish Detainee Memorial and Information Centre. I'm writing as the Minister of State responsible for human rights ahead of the commemorative ceremony taking place on Wednesday, the 12th of August, 2020, at the Saint-Martin Jewish Cemetery to remember the more than 1,500 Jews who were detained in Mauritius in the 1940s. During this significant year for Holocaust commemoration, it is important to recognize the suffering endured by those who fled persecution in Nazi-occupied Europe, as well as to acknowledge the hardship that many Jews and members of other communities suffered after they left Europe. As the UK's Minister of State for Human Rights, I would like to pay tribute to the Beau Bassin Jewish Detainee Memorial and Information Centre for their work to commemorate the history of Jewish refugees in Mauritius. As the former Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt MP, alluded to last year, there are open questions about whether things could have been done differently, such as the 1939 White Paper, which capped the number of visas issued to Jews wanting to go to British Mandate Palestine. I would like to commit personally to you that the UK will continue our work to remember and honour all victims and survivors around the world. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank Lord Ahmad for his letter and for his kind and relevant words. And with that, I'd like to end here. But before doing so, I want to thank those who made today's virtual function possible. Tali Regev, as the Director of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre, Dr. Ronnie Mikel Arieli, a Rosa Luxemburg Research Fellow, the African Jewish Congress, and the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. To you all, a hearty thanks. Toda Rabba.
Thank you very much for your opening remarks and sharing with us this news of the letter received from the UK government. I thank you very much for your words. And now it is my honor and pleasure to introduce two of the next speakers to you. The first is Gideon Itzkovich, who is one of the babies born in the camp. Gideon is the son of Chaya and Yochanan Itzkovich, originally from Czechoslovakia. He will read to us the Mauritius Exiles anthem in Hebrew and in English. And then I would like to introduce to you Tali or Tali Regev, one of the babies born in the camp that is currently serving on the Honorary Council of Mauritius in Israel, that will deliver his keynote address and testimony to you. Gideon, the floor is yours.
Gideon, just unmute.
Yes, you'll need to unmute yourself. Thank you.
No, you're muted. Wait, you're muted.
Mdu, can you unmute Gideon, please? Thank you so much.
And now it's okay?
Yes.
Okay. המנון גולי מאוריציוס. מאוריציאנים אנו מעלייה ב' להנחות לא אבא איש אותנו. הדרך לבוא ולצאת. עצורים כך שנים פה נשארנו, בחולי, בגשם, בחום. נואש מעולם לא אמרנו, ורצוננו חושל בו עד תום. כך זכינו לעלות למולדתנו, הגענו לחוף מבטחים. את שממות העד של ארצנו, לעבוד ולגאול מאחים. אבותות ידידות יקשרנו, בברית קיימת לעד. אף סופות החול לא יפרידנו, תמיד נשאר יחדיו. And now the English version. We are the Mauritians from Aliyah Bet. Nobody wanted us to direct. In prison for years we have we stayed. In sickness, rain, and in heat. We were never disturbed. Our will has blessed us till the end. The ship brought us to the coast, to our promised land. There we found western land to build with our skilled hand. We remain friends, tied in converse forever. Even the sandstorm will not separate us. We will be together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gideon, for reading the anthem in English and in Hebrew. It is wonderful. Tali Regev, that is here with us, and maybe Tali, if you can unmute yourself and just saying hello before I'm going to share your message with everyone. So if you can just unmute yourself, say hello, yeah, and I will organize.
So good afternoon to everybody. I'm very honored to be here and to have some words. Unfortunately, we are not in Mauritius, but we are looking forward to meet again in a year's time. And I prepared my small speech before, so instead that I will repeat it now, please.
Yes, absolutely. So here is Tali Regev's address to us.
Shalom and good afternoon to all of you. I'm honored to say some words of introduction to this moving moment of the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the Jewish detainees from the Beau Bassin Prison. First of all, I would like to deliver my thanks to the initiators and those who worked to fulfill the idea and to make the virtual commemorative ceremony event. I hope that in a year's time, we'll be able to celebrate the actual liberation ceremony in Mauritius. I, Tali Regev Zwergbaum, the son of Regina and Dr. Aharon Zwergbaum, who were deported by the British to the island of Mauritius, along with 1,580 other Ma'apilim, illegal immigrants, who were on the way to the shores of Palestine from Europe. My father, an active member of the Zionist movement in Czechoslovakia, and my mother, who arrived from Danzig, met on the way to Bratislava and were later married in Mauritius. Their wish was to immigrate to the Promised Land, but for the British, they were illegal immigrants, were arrested in Athlete, and were deported to Mauritius, where they spent 5 years of their life in prison. Life in the prison was not easy at all. The women and men were separated. They suffered from malaria, typhoid, and other diseases, which took the life of over 120 detainees. We are here today to commemorate those who survived and were liberated 75 years ago, and those who did not and are buried in Saint Martin Cemetery. The whole saga of Mauritius exile and of the preceding period is described in my father's diaries, which he wrote with his typewriter during the years of exile. His book, The Mauritian Affair, published by Yad Vashem, and the most thought and comprehensive way in Geneviève Pichot's book, The Mauritian Shekel. But in spite of it, the story of the Mauritian Affair is still unknown to the most of the people of Israel and around the world. And I hope that this virtual commemorative ceremony event will bring this unique chapter in the history of the Jewish people to broader audiences. I was born in the central prison of the island in Beau Bassin, among 60 other children 76 years ago. I first returned to Mauritius with my wife and my parents in 1988. The circuit closed when I was appointed to the Honorary Council of the Republic of Mauritius in Israel in 1966. Again, I'm grateful and thankful to all of those who enabled us to participate in the virtual ceremony. And I would like to finish my short speech with thanks to the people of Mauritius who tried and succeeded during this dark period to make the detainees' life a little bit better. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you very much, Tali. It's very emotional. And thank you, Gideon, as well, for sharing the poem. I think that it brings us a little bit closer, you know, to this story. And now what we thought to do is to bring three other voices to shed more light to this story and from all sides. The first will be Dr. Ronnie Michel-Arieli. She is an associate researcher at the Visiting Scholars Program of the Jack Joseph and Morton Mendel Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and a Rosa Luxemburg Research Fellow at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. Her area of research is this exact period of history. So Ronnie will be able to share with us a very short historical overview of this period. She will be followed by a recording of Vanessa Kalu sharing two stories of detainees as told in the St. Martin's Cemetery. Now, the recording was taken a few days ago during an extremely windy day, but it is so important for us to bring this recording to you, as it was done in the cemetery itself, next to the graves that the stories tell us about. So Vanessa Kalu is the education officer at the Beau Bassin Jewish Detainees Memorial and Information Center. And lastly, Gil Lahauser, representing Friends of the Environment and the Detainees Memorial Education Team, will read to us another poem, this time the Mauritian exile poem. Ronnie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tali. I will also share my screen. If I can. So good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Tali, for the kind introduction. My name is Ronnie Michel-Arieli, and I am a cultural historian who is well invested in Southern African Jewish history. And my interest in the Indian Ocean begins in South Africa and builds on my PhD dissertation on Holocaust memory in apartheid South Africa. And as part of my PhD research, I visited South Africa for the first time in February 2014, where I learned that the South African Jewish Board of Deputies was highly invested in a new commemorative project and a memorial center to commemorate the Jewish detainees held in the detention camp in the British colony of Mauritius. Working at the South African Jewish Board of Deputies archives in Johannesburg, I located a box containing correspondence between the Jewish detainees and the South African community from the years 1940 to 1945. And these materials revealed the community's investment in assisting the Jewish refugees across the Indian Ocean. Yet while these ties were extremely relevant to my dissertation, it soon became clear that due to the scope and importance of this episode, the Mauritian case needs to be treated as a separate research project. And on the next few minutes or so, I would like to give you a short overview of the history and memory of the Jewish deportation to Mauritius. This little known episode begins on 5 December 1940, when two ships, Uranus and Hilos, set sail from Bratislava, Slovakia, carrying 3,500 illegal Jewish immigrants, also known as Aliyah Bet, escaping Nazi-controlled Europe. The refugees included people from the Jewish communities of Vienna, Prague, Brno, Berlin, Munich, and Danzig, and came from diverse Jewish backgrounds and ideological affiliations. A week after leaving Bratislava, the refugees arrived at Tolse, Romania, a city situated on the delta of the Danube River, where they were transported to three very old ships, Atlantic, Milos, and Pacific, to begin their long voyage to Palestine. On 7 October, the 1,880 Atlantic passengers, including more than 300 who were over the age of 60 and about 150 children under the age of 12, departed on their long voyage. The ship was overcrowded, and the passengers occupied cabins, the catacombs, the passages, and any other space available on board the ship. The Atlantic sailed from Tulsa to Palestine through the islands of Crete and Cyprus and arrived in the harbor of Haifa on the morning of 24 November 1940. Following the 1939 British White Paper enforcing a strict immigration quota for Jews entering Palestine, some of the arriving immigrants were forcibly transferred to another ship called the Patria to be deported to the British colony of Mauritius. The passengers of the Milos and the Pacific who arrived earlier to Haifa were already on board the Patria when the Atlantic passengers arrived. The next morning, on the 25th November, the Haganah, an underground military organization of the Jewish Yishuv in Palestine, decided to sabotage the ship in order to prevent the planned deportation, a decision that caused the tragic death of more than 260 Jewish refugees. The British authorities permitted the survivors of the Patria to remain in Palestine, transferring them to the Atlin detention camp near Haifa. However, on 5 December, 1,580 of the Atlantic passengers were forcibly removed from the Atlin camp, placed on 2 Dutch ships, and deported to Mauritius. On 26 December 1940, after traveling in overcrowded ships for 17 days, the refugees arrived at the harbor of Port Louis, the capital of Mauritius. As indicated in many of the testimonies, when the refugees arrived, many Mauritians lined the road greeting and cheering them. Although the warm reception received by the local population, there was no paradise waiting for the refugees in their new location. At the end of the long voyage, buses and trucks transferred the refugees to the central prison of Beau Bassin, where most of them spent the next 4 years and 7 months imprisoned behind iron gates. The high walls of the principal compound ensured the separation between the 2 sections of prison. The men were accommodated in the prison cells, and the women and children were brought to a compound of specially built huts. The major concern during the early months of detention was the number of sick and dead detainees, and an average of 10% of the people were kept in the camp hospital. As mentioned, at the time of their arrival, there was no Jewish community on the island. The closest community was that of South Africa, located 3,637 kilometers away. As soon as the news about the deportation to Mauritius reached South Africa, the South African Jewish Board of Deputies established a special committee to communicate with the local and colonial authorities and to provide food, clothing, medicine, religious items, and reading materials for the refugees. Despite the strict conditions, the detainees developed a vibrant social, cultural, and political community life during their 4 years and 7 months in prison. There were 2 religious communities and 2 synagogues in the camp, Orthodox and Liberal. There was a canteen and a camp library, a school and an adult education center. The detainees established the Maccabi Youth Movement, a camp newspaper, a music band, and the Zionist Association of Mauritius. The detainees were kept occupied through workshops established in the camp, in which they produced wooden and fabric toys, silver jewelry, and other items that were sold outside the camp. For a limited period in 1942, some of the detainees got permits to work outside of the camp, which allowed better interaction with the local population. Some of them were teaching Mauritian children art, weaving, and music, for example. On February 21st, 1945, the governor of Mauritius informed the detainees' leadership that the British authorities had decided to allow the Jewish refugees to enter Palestine. However, it took another 6 months before the refugees left the island. In 1946, the South African Jewish Board of Deputies acquired ownership of the St. Martin Jewish Cemetery in Mauritius, where 128 Jewish refugees who died during their detention were buried. Despite this, no public effort was made to keep the memory of this episode alive. Though there have been some commemoration efforts since the 90s, the Jewish deportation to Mauritius is largely neglected from most accounts of World War II and the Holocaust. In November 2014, the Beau Bassin Jewish Detainees Memorial and Information Center officially opened, situated next to the St. Martin Cemetery. And this new center is the first step in ensuring that this important history will not be forgotten. Last January, during my last visit in Mauritius, when we started planning this ceremony and had no idea that it would be eventually a virtual event, we also launched a video testimony project and conducted the first interviews with people from Mauritius who remember the refugees and who had personal recollections of the wartime episode. Some of these witnesses to history are here with us today. By capturing the act of remembrance of witnesses to history, these testimonies and personal materials add another layer to this forgotten history. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ronnie, and thank you for filling us on a short version of the story. Just to share with you that in today's edition of Times of Israel, there is a much longer version of the story published. So please, I call all of you, and Ronnie, maybe you can put in the chat the link to the article in the Times of Israel exactly today, and we are very grateful to the writer for commemorating the day in such a meaningful way. Vanessa Kalu is with us, but we will share now a recording, as I said to you, that was taken a few days ago in the St. Martin's Cemetery to allow Vanessa to share with us some of her stories.
Hi viewers, my name is Vanessa Kalu. I am a guide at the Jewish Detainees Memorial Center of Beau Bassin in Mauritius. I've been working for the memorial for 5 years, and I've got the opportunity to meet visitors, family of detainees and friends who share personal story behind the graves. But when you come across families who lost 1, 2, or 3 members of their loved ones during their detention, believe me, during my 20 years of career as a guide, the most difficult task I've got is to find the right words to comfort these visitors, I must say, at the right time. Today I'm going to share with you 2 stories of families who lost 2 or 3 family members during their detention. My first story is about the George family. There were only 3 Jewish families living in Bismarck, a town 80 kilometers of Vienna, Austria. These families were mostly merchants. The children of Leopold and and Johanna Jones were among these families. Caroline Reninger, née Joel, was affectionately known as Lily. She was born on the 15th March, 1885. She was a tailoress and married to Sigmund Reninger. The couple had only one son, and as many Jewish families did during Nazi persecution, they departed their son first to the promised land. In September 1940, Caroline and Sigmund, together with 6 others of Caroline's siblings and their families, were among the illegal passengers of the Atlantic en route to Palestine. Arriving in Haifa, some members of the Jones family were transferred on the Patria. During the explosion of the Patria, the Jones family was separated. Some of them got asylum because they were survivors of the Patria. Others got asylum because they were too sick to travel. Unfortunately, the Reninger couple, as well as other members of the Joel family, were among the deportees of Mauritius. The Joel lost 3 members of their family during their detention in Mauritius. Caroline died of typhoid fever on 29 January 1941. She was buried 1 day after her sister-in-law, Amalia, who lies 1 grave apart. Their brother-in-law, Adolf Gesser, also died in Mauritius just months before they were released from the Mauritius detainment. I would like to deliver a special thanks to Mrs. Nancy Katz and her family from the US for sharing their family history with Lawrence Glatz, author of the book Travel to Lost Neighbors, The Jews of Bismarck. My second story is about the Lipinski family. The Lipinski family was from Danzig. Father Mordechai, Mother Pesa, and their 2 children, Yitzhak and Hela, were among the refugees of Mauritius. The family was separated during their detention because one of the most severe rules in the detainment camp of Mauritius was not to have family life. Mordechai was detained in the men's camp while his wife and children were living in the women's camp. Weeks after their arrival, Yitzhak died. And then his mother, Pesa, died. They both died of typhoid fever. Now imagine the only member left in the women's camp, Hela, became nearly orphaned. Hela was only 12 years old at the time of deportation. Now she was living with near strangers on a foreign land, and not to say like many refugees used to describe Mauritius on a faraway island. Her father, Mordechai, became blind during their detention. An exhibition panel is dedicated to this one girl's story in the memorial. There are photos of her among her school friends, artifacts like handkerchief necklace, handbags, and I must point out that handicrafts was one of the tasks performed by detainees during their stay in Mauritius. 70 years ago, Mordechai and his daughter Hela boarded the ship Franconia to leave Mauritius. It was decided that Hela would proceed to Cape Town, where she got relatives, and Mordechai would proceed to Palestine, where he could find accommodation and a special needs facility. Hela Ripinski settled in Cape Town, got married, and got a family on her own. It's only after her passing that a member of her family discovered a pile of typewritten paper in German. The papers were translated. Then her family members became aware of their mother's detention in Mauritius. I thank the Horowitz family for the sharing of their family history. And I also want to thank all those visitors whom I have personally met on their healing journey to Mauritius and share their family history. I want you to know that your sharing are shedding light on this part of history. Now, one of our missions is to care, conserve, and transmit this part of history to the future generation so that it never happens again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, for sharing with us those stories. Members of these families are with us today and in this virtual commemoration, and it's very, very important for us that you shared just 2 of the 128 stories from the St. Martin's Cemetery. Jill, if you can unmute your microphone and share with us now the poem of the Exiles.
All right. We are illegal immigrants, alia bet. We have crossed lands and oceans. Coincidence determined our fate. But one day we will arrive to our promised land. Because for us, there's no return. This is where our story ends.
Thank you very much, Jill. So much art, poetry, and more was done in those almost 5 years, and it's important to remember that as well. As we remember the refugees who were deported to the island in December of 1940 and spent 4 years and 7 months in the prison camp of Beau Bassin, and the 128 detainees who lost their lives and are buried in the St. Martin's Jewish Cemetery. We will now have a symbolic candle lighting ceremony. Lighting the 6 candles will be Tali Regev, ex-detainee, born on the island; Oscar Langsam, ex-detainee, one of the children that was detained on the island; Sonia Birger, representing the family of the only Jew on the island at that time; Marie-Claude Souchon, representing the Mauritians who interacted and helped the detainees, and she will be lighting a candle for detainee Anna Frank, who painted her portrait as a child. Mary Klook, the national president of the South African Jewish Board of Deputies and World Jewish Congress vice president, will light a candle representing the South African Jewish Board of Deputies and their role during and after the events of the Second World War. And finally, Anne Harris, president of the African Jewish Congress, will light her candle representing the work of the African Jewish Congress.
I, Tali Regev, the son of Regina and Dr. Aharon Zwergbaum, would like to light this candle as a representative of the 60 babies born in Beau Bassin Detainees camp in Mauritius, and in the memory of my late parents and the 128 Jewish refugees who died during the detention.
I, Oscar Langsam, am the son of Aharon Langsam, who was murdered by the Nazis in Yugoslavia, Zazavica, in 1941. I lit this candle as the representative of the 96 children who were deported by the British authorities of Palestine to the island of Mauritius in 1940. In memory of Butz Yaakov Kurnik, who fell in the Six-Day War, Leopold Bubi Keller, Dorshin Zamori and Lily Haas, and our music teacher Dita Eisler, a young, gifted, beautiful woman who a few months before our liberation died with polio. May they all rest in peace. I am in touch through her attendant with my classmate in Mauritius, Sabina Jaffa. She lives in Rishon LeZion. She was our neighbor in Danzig, and when we were little children, we played together. Now she's over 90 years old. I was 2 days in Mauritius a few years ago, visiting the Jewish cemetery in Saint Martin, and said Kaddish on Dita's grave. I remember but lost touch with friends, Wolfi Klamtach, Heinz Wildorf, Harald Wronner, and our teachers like Ilke Samstag, Dr. Bieler, Dr. Zwergbaum, Mrs. Krumbügel, Adi Sherman, Golci, and Erwin Sitzmann. Our stay in Mauritius, in the Beau Bassin detainment camp, is strongly engraved in my mind, even now, at the age of 89.
I, Marie-Claude Souchon, born in Mauritius in 1934, would like to light this candle in memory of Anna Frank Klein, a German Jewish refugee detained in Mauritius. In late 1942, my father, André Piat, asked Anna Frank Klein, a Jewish refugee from Germany detained in Mauritius, to paint a portrait of me and my sister. We were told that the Jews were being allowed to earn a little money, so my father paid the artist Anna to paint our portraits. The portraits are precious to us. The one of me still hangs on my living room wall today, and my late sister's portrait is with her daughter. I light this candle in memory of Anna Frank Klein and the other Jewish refugees detained on the island during the war period.
I am the daughter of Isia Berger and my name is Sonia. I am with one of my daughter and granddaughter. My father was the only Jew in Mauritius when the detainees arrived on the island. Originally from Lithuania, my father settled in Mauritius in 1937. He became the liaison between the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, the British colonial authorities, and the Jewish refugees detained on the island. After the war, he helped to maintain the St. Martin's Jewish Cemetery, which our family continues to do. He is now buried in this cemetery. My daughter Celine will light this candle in memory of my father, Isia Birger, and all those who came to the aid of the refugees.
On va y arriver. Essaye de cacher un petit peu Guilla.
I feel very proud as the Vice President of the World Jewish Congress and the National President of the South African Jewish Board of Deputies to light this candle in acknowledgement of the role played by the South African Jewish community in particular in this episode of our history. When knowledge of the detainees became known to the South African Jewish community, the SAJBD established a special committee in support of the detainees, particularly in sending food, clothing, religious artifacts, and religious symbols, matzah for Pesach, as well as reading material. And they also played the role of being the mouthpiece and the news of what was happening and the condition of the detainees to the rest of the world, and the Jewish world in particular. When the detainees arrived, they began the task of dealing with the High Commission in South Africa in trying everything to improve the lives of the detainees on the island. And our records show that they were influential in being able to arrange for men and women to actually cohabit for certain parts of the day, which had been forbidden until this had been appealed to the High Commission to arrange. This episode of history needs never to be forgotten. And at the end, in 1945, when the detainees left, the board and the South African Jewish community acquired ownership of the St. Martin Cemetery, where 128 detainees who had died are buried. They have maintained the cemetery since then and continue to play an important role in ensuring that this history will never be forgotten.
I am Anne Harris, President of the African Jewish Congress, and I light this candle to keep the memory of the Jewish deportation to Mauritius alive. Over the last 2 decades, with the motivation of the late Mervyn Smith, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, and the guidance of Rabbi Moshe Silverhaft and Owen Griffiths, assisted by the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, the cemetery has been enclosed and restored. New tombstones have been laid on all the graves, and each one is marked to show the origin of the person buried there. An important outcome of these efforts was the establishment of the Beau Bassin Jewish Detainees Memorial and Information Center at Saint Martin's Jewish Cemetery in Mauritius in November 2014.
As we are nearing the end of this ceremony, I call on Rabbi Moshe Silverhaft, the spiritual leader and CEO of the African Jewish Congress, to recite El Maleh Rachamim with us. After that, this will be followed by the Mauritius and Israeli national anthems. Rabbi, please unmute yourself and recite the El Maleh Rachamim.
Right, can you all hear me? Right. Thank you very much, Tali, and thank you to everybody that are involved in this project. As you heard from Mrs. Harris and Mary Klug, the Jewish Board and the African Jewish Congress have been involved in this the project of maintaining and restoring and preserving the history, this important part of history, for over 20 years, 25 years, and I encourage everybody to continue. And thank you all for being involved today and participating. To all our friends, to Owen, Andrew Sloan, to Tali Regev, Anne Harris, yourself, Tali, and all the other important people, Kishore, that are involved in the day-to-day running of the community and preserving this history. I thank you all for being involved, and I bless you all. Those of you, many of you remember that we've had a number of reunions and tours back to Mauritius, 1999, 2001, 2005, 2011, 2014, and I welcome and look forward, please God, to this what we are doing now, but please God to be there in 2021. I just want to also acknowledge Rabbi Barber, who's the Chabad rabbi on the island, and he'll remember that in 2016, he and I conducted the first Yom HaShoah ceremony at the St. Martin's Jewish Cemetery. And we lit 6 candles, and for me personally, it was one of the absolute emotional highlights of my involvement, my over 25 years involvement with Mauritius. And we need to remember the importance, and as I say, we look forward to next year being all there together. El Maleh Rachamim Shochem Bamromim Hametzei Menucha Nochona Tachat Kanfei Ashchina B'ma'alot Kedoshim Otorim Kazor Harakia Mazirin Et Nishmot Kol Ele Shekvurim Beit HaKfarot Saint Martin B'Mauritius Shalchu Le'olamam Ba'avur Shekulanu Zochrim V'mitpalelim Ba'ad Haskarat Nishmatam Began Eden etei menuchatam lachem balarachamim yastireihem v'seiter knafav leolamim v'yitzror b'yitzror achayim et nishmotam Adonai unachalatam v'tanuchu al mishkava b'shalom v'nomar Amen. Amen. Our Lord, who art full of compassion, who dwellest on high, God of forgiveness, who art merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in loving kindness, grant pardon of transgression, nearness of salvation, and perfect rest beneath the shadow of thy divine presence in the exalted places among the holy and pure, who shine as a brightness of the firmament, to all those 128 people plus those that have subsequently been buried in the St. Martin Jewish Cemetery. We must also remember the over 200 people that were killed when the ships were bombed, leaving the port, as well as those that once the ships left British Palestine and on the way to Mauritius, if I'm not mistaken, 17 people died along the way and didn't make it to Mauritius either. We need to remember them and their souls at this time. We beseech you, our Lord of compassion, remember unto them for all the good and meritorious deeds which they did upon earth. Open unto them the gates of righteousness and light, the gates of pity and grace, and shelter them forevermore under the cover of thy wings, and let their souls be bound up in the bond of eternal life. You, God, are their inheritance. May they all rest in peace, and let us all say, Amen. Amen.
This brings us to the end of the ceremony today. I would like to thank you very much for joining this powerful, emotional, and important ceremony, helping us to remember, learn, and carry the message from the past to the future for generations to come. Thank you again to all our partners who made this event possible, to all the speakers, and to all of you. Stay safe, stay healthy and well, and goodbye.